To tell us what the international desk has for us for the coming week, we are joined by SABC News Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. We are learning of a visit when it comes to the White House, Venezuela, and the matter being a developing story, and really learning of Machado's visits to the White House. As one tries to get a sense of what Maria Machado's visit to the White House would be about on the strategic element, how does it fit into the current U.S. policy toward Venezuela?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. Maria Corina Machado expected, based on President Donald Trump's remarks in an interview this past week, that she would be expected to visit the White House this week. And remember, this comes in the context of the U.S.'s sweeping military action against Venezuela that saw the ouster of deposed President Nicolas Maduro and the First Lady, Celia Flores. You'll recall that they appeared at their first court appearance on Monday in New York federal court, pleading not guilty to those narco-trafficking terrorism charges. So the context of Maria Machado's visit, right, the ousted longtime opposition leader in Venezuela that claims that the opposition won handily in last year's 2024 presidential election, which international observers criticize as not free and fair and not meeting the standards of democracy, but it also coming in the context of President Donald Trump's statements that he does not believe she has the respect or the support in Venezuela to lead a future government there. And so despite the ouster of Nicolas Maduro, the government, right, his government still essentially remains in place as the United States now seeks to assert control over Venezuela's oil production. President Trump also announcing some 30 to 50 million barrels of oil that will be transferred to the United States, and the conditions under which that transfer will happen still remain unclear. And so Machado comes to the White House seeking a greater U.S. support for a future in which she could lead Venezuela. That doesn't seem clear right now. But what we'll also particularly be watching for, Paul, is her remarks in a Fox News interview this past week, where she says she's willing to share the Nobel Peace Prize that she won in November last year with the President of the United States. I will just also add that the Nobel Committee has come out with a statement recently saying that the prize cannot be shared or transferred once it has been awarded. So President Trump has said he will welcome the reception of that prize. The validity of which is certainly now in question, but these are certainly the dynamics that we'll be watching for this week.
As we look to another story, I mean, the fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good by an officer in Minneapolis, how has that, had an effect in terms of affecting public trust and the views on U.S. immigration enforcement?
You know, the first test of this is really going to come in the midterm elections that happen in November. This will be an opportunity to see where the chips have fallen since President Donald Trump took the helm at the White House in January last year. And that'll be the really first test as to whether these domestic policies, these foreign policies are working and has continued support from the majority of Americans. The shooting of Ms. Good by a federal immigration and customs enforcement official has won widespread backing from the federal government, the White House in particular, asserting that he was acting in self-defense. Of course, people can look at the video, the various angles of that incident online, and Democrats and many Americans taking to the streets. We're told over 1,000 protests around the United States over this weekend, protesting the action of these ICE enforcement officers that led to the shooting at point blank of Ms. Good, who many argue was seeking to drive away from these officers when she was shot. So that is something that is playing itself out on the streets of New York, on the streets of many, many cities around the country. Of course, this happened in Minneapolis. Minneapolis, of course, is the same venue that saw the demise of that horrific knee on the neck killing of that victim some years ago. And so The stakes are very, very high here, and where we go remains unclear. But the federal government standing behind this officer, and the response has been that this sort of enforcement needs to stop.
Yeah, yeah. On the other front, President Donald Trump has reiterated that the U.S. may act to acquire Greenland, whether they like it or not. I mean, how seriously should the international community take such a threat?
Yeah, I just hit a blank in terms of George Floyd's name there. My apologies
Yeah.
for that, but that was who I was referencing then. In terms of Greenland, right? The Trump doctrine. What does the Trump doctrine tell us about what might happen here? Look, NATO leaders, European leaders have come out with a very strong statement that they will defend, this territory. This is a NATO territory. The alliance doesn't attack each other. The United States is a member of that alliance. And so the posture here of Europe is something to watch very closely. The posture of the United States, we understand that there have been interactions between the foreign policy leaders of Greenland, Denmark, and the United States, and they're seeking engagement. Understand that the United States already, Paul, has a treaty with Greenland where it is allowed to expand its military presence on the island without trying to usurp the authority of Greenlanders, without seeking to usurp the authority of the Danish in this. And so those are ongoing conversations that will be watched very closely. But the attack on Venezuela, right, has really seen tensions rise here in terms of, what to expect from the United States, because this is a new sheriff in town. And so where we go from here remains very unclear. But the U.S. has made it very clear. President Trump has said they don't want to lease Greenland, based on their military presence there already. They say that it's important for them to own it so that they can defend it from the Russians and the Chinese. But this is causing a little bit of a rupture between long-standing allies here. And so the runway as to where we land here remains unclear. But the Europeans are asserting themselves that this is unacceptable behavior from the Trump administration. But that certainly hasn't led to him backing down yet.
Yeah, Sherwin, as we look to the week ahead, in light of the rising tensions around U.S. immigration and foreign policy, there are questions being asked about the safety of Canada. What assurance can be made about Canada's safety for migrants and visitors alike?
Look, it's a complicated one. I mean, Canada's safety seems fine if there are no interventions from the United States, right? You've had this long-standing debate about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. That, of course, seems a bit of a stretch. Canada, of course, a G7 member, and one imagines that there would be a repudiation to any such action moving forward here. But in terms of safety, Canada is a co-host in this year's FIFA World Cup, and I'm sure the Canadians will be asserting the authority when it comes to all sorts of security matters.
And looking at a different front, Iran has warned the U.S. and Israel that they will be legitimate targets if the U.S. strikes Tehran. How credible are these threats?
Very credible in the context of what we just saw in Venezuela. And remember, Iran has already been struck by the United States in relation to the posture with Israel. The United States, of course, famously hitting those nuclear sites in Iran. And so we know what the United States is capable of. Yeah, President Trump talking about on social media the other day that Iran is looking for freedom, perhaps like never before. The United States stands ready to help. What that help looks like is probably militarily. The United States, the New York Times, reporting over the weekend that Trump has been briefed on possible military strikes, including non-military targets. And so that will certainly send shivers up the spine of many Iranian Revolutionary Guard leaders, the Iranian military. But their posture is that if the United States will attack, it will be a miscalculation, and that U.S. sites and assets in the region will be fair game. You recall the Iranians striking, or certainly seeking to strike, a U.S. military base in Doha, the capital of Qatar, sending concerns around that region in particular. So, if anything is possible, the United States asserts its foreign policy that the military options are always on the table, even when you talk about Canada, even when you talk about Greenland. So, one imagines that that perspective remains true in relation to Iran as well.
Yeah. We also know that there's a potential Supreme Court ruling on the Trump administration tariffs. How might such a decision affect the Trump administration's tariff policies and the ripple effect in terms of who may be impacted, trade partners, industries? What are we looking at?
Well, the ripple effect is going to ripple across the globe, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got a tariff imposed. South Africa, 30%. You might be, in the 15% bracket or the 50% bracket, like Brazil and India and others. It will certainly impact everybody around the world. We expected possibly a ruling on Friday last week. That didn't happen. All the Supreme Court tells us, and Paul, before a ruling, is that it's going to be an opinion day. So what opinion comes down, we don't know until the opinion is released on its website. And so the Supreme Court has now since indicated that the next opinion day will be on Wednesday this week. So we expect that we could get a tariff ruling on Wednesday, but we cannot be too sure. But it's coming. It's coming within the next couple of weeks, certainly the next couple of days, we imagine. And of course, at question here is the power of the president to use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which allows the president to control commerce, to impose restrictions and that sort of thing based on a national emergency. What the Trump administration has said here is that their national emergency is trade deficits with countries. Can a trade deficit be a national emergency? Maybe that is something the court will lean into and explain to us. But they two lower courts, right? This comes in the context of two lower courts, the trade court here in Manhattan, the appeals court for the federal circuit in D.C. coming down with a 7-4 decision in August last year, that the president overstepped his authority in terms of this act, that this act does not give the president the power to levy taxes. Taxes are the purview of the United States Congress. So he cannot take that power away from Congress. This is what we see clarity from the Supreme Court. And of course, this will be the final arbiter in terms of the judicial process in the United States. And that will then possibly mean, if it's struck down, that the United States will have to reimburse the companies the billions of dollars that have been paid in tariffs by companies in the U.S. essentially, and what that reimbursement looking forward, looks is unknown.
Yeah.
But what we've also heard is that the U.S. will find other ways to impose the tariffs if the use of this act is struck down. So, yeah, tariffs are probably not going to go away.
Very well. Thank you so much, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, of course, giving us a sense of the week ahead on the international front as we continue to monitor those developments.